All right, welcome back, everyone. So in this first video, really what we're going to be staying focused on is creating some plumbing for our application, just getting our workspace set up, getting our folder and file structure correct, making sure all of our references are correct, getting our code up to GitHub, all that fun stuff. So that's really the purpose of this video, and really what I would recommend before we get started on any big application like this, really just make sure you're in a good space. You certainly don't want to be, writing 50 lines of code and realize that your folder structure, your file structure just isn't right, your references aren't right. You start debugging and running into all sorts of errors that you could probably address early on. So it's good to just get yourself into a good place early on, in my opinion. So that being said, what I'm going to do first is, and this part you don't necessarily need to follow along with, I'm going to make a folder here, and I'm just going to call it like RPS 01. By the time you get this, there will be multiple folders. However, I'm going to make them as we go. So again, you don't need to do this. All of your code can kind of live in one folder and we'll build on it. But I will be pushing up each iterative version of this to GitHub so you can kind of see where we are at any point in time. So that being said, I'll just have this first folder, and already I have in this folder a subfolder called assets that has a folder called images, and in there just some images that we're going to use, so that way we're kind of all looking at the same stuff. So if you want to change out the images, great. These are just things I Googled, some fun rock, paper, scissors pictures. So that's what we're going to use there. The next thing I'm going to do is collapse that. I'm going to open up a terminal window, and I'm going to change my directory, and I'm just going to make some of the files that we need. So at this point, what we really need is an index.html folder. So I'm going to do touch index.html. I'm going to change directories into assets, and I'm going to make a directory called CSS, and I'm going to make a directory called JS. In the CSS folder, CD into there, I'm going to do a touch and make a file called styles.css. And then I'm going to go back into the JavaScript folder, and I'm going to make a file called RPS.js. And take a look where we're at. So now I should have created a folder structure that looks like this, that at the root level, I have an index.html. Let me close this now, which is blank. In my assets folder, I previously just had images. Now I have a new folder called CSS, which has a file called styles.css. And I have a folder called JS that has a rps.js. Everything we've done up until now in class, we've really had our JavaScript living inside the index.html file. With the amount of code that we're going to need to write, I just think it makes a little bit more sense to show us writing some code in a separate file. And again, really just to expand our skill sets at this point to just be doing more and more things. And I think throughout this video, I'll try to demonstrate some things that we've either never covered or things that we only covered a little bit. So let's kind of get these files set up. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit exclamation point and tab and get myself the boilerplate code for my HTML file. So I think at this point I want to change just the document title. Maybe we'll call this, I don't know, rock, paper, scissors game. And then I want to give myself a script tag a link tag for my CSS file. So I'm just going to type link and hit tab, and that'll give me most of the stuff. And really it just needs a reference to where my CSS file is in this property right here. So what I'm going to do is, I know in my folder structure, I have a folder that sits next to it called assets. So I'm going to type assets. VS Code's already helping me along. Inside of assets, I have a folder called CSS. And then inside of CSS, I have a file called styles.css. So I'm going to type all that out. And I'm going to save that. The other thing I want to do is, what we've seen again is, JavaScript code living within our HTML file itself, where we've been writing console logs or alerts or whatever. What we're going to do is have a reference to our JavaScript file in the HTML file, but that JavaScript is going to live in this file right here. So we just need to give that a reference. And we should do that right before the closing body tag. So this is the closing body tag right before. I'm going to want to have a script, and we'll just hit tab on that. And I'm going to give it a relative path again, which is going to be similar to my CSS. So it's going to be an assets / JavaScript / RPS.js. I'm going to save that there. So at this point, what I want to do is make sure everything's working. And I'll kind of test to make sure, did I set up my index.html correctly? Did I set up my JavaScript file correctly? Did I set up my CSS file correctly? And then we'll kind of do that real easily. So HTML, pretty easy. I think we can just put anything on the page and see if it works. So I'm going to put an H1 that says hello world and save it. And I'm going to right click and open in default browser. And there we go. It says hello world. So I feel good about that. We can test our CSS. Let's go to our CSS file here. And if that's right, I should be able to target the H1s and give it a text color, something fun like that. That'll work. See if we get this slime, disgusting green to show up when we refresh. And we do. So I know my CSS file works. And then let's go to my JavaScript file here. And at this point, this JavaScript file is going to load when the HTML page loads, and this will read from top to bottom. So what we can do, I'm going to go back and go into my inspect. We can see there's nothing in the console currently, but I'm going to give a console.log, and we'll just put whatever, hello, and we'll save it. And if I refresh, now I should see hello. So I feel good about all that. I feel good that my JavaScript file is in the right folder and it's referenced in the index.html, and I know it works from that console log. My index.html is set up correctly because obviously I'm seeing the H1 tag, and same is true for my CSS file. So I feel pretty good about all that, and I think that's really a good setup point. So I think what I want to do at this point is, I think everything's saved. Yeah, I got nothing unsaved. So what I want to do is probably head over to GitHub and create a repository so I can start saving this code to GitHub. Let's close this for now. I'm going to make a new repository. I'm going to call this RPS game, I guess. I'm not going to give it a description. We'll keep it public. I'm not going to initialize it with a README. And I'm going to hit create repository. And I'm not going to, intentionally, I'm not going to hit initialize with a README. I'm not sure if we showed this in class, but just kind of show how we can get this going and kind of push our code from our local machine to GitHub. I think most of the times we've seen is create a repository and clone it down and then start working. So we'll kind of show a little reverse flow there. So I'll hit create repository. Once I do that, you'll see we have maybe a different screen if you've never done this before. And this will give us kind of some directions that we can follow along with to get our local code into this repository. So we can really skip this. What this line is doing would pretty much be making a readme.markdown file and just be putting some, the title of our repository name in that file. But we don't need to do that. We have other files to commit. So we're going to skip that first line. We're going to jump right down to here. So what we're going to do, and I'm actually just going to copy this, and just to have it all on the same screen, I'm going to just going to put it here. We're going to delete it later, but I'm going to put it there, and let's collapse that, and scroll that down, and scroll this down a little bit. Let's bring this back up, just so we can kind of see it and follow along. So again, we're not going to do this first line, number 16, so we don't need to worry about that. What I do need to do, though, is I do need to go back a couple folders, and I want to be at the root of my directory, which for me is one more. So you may not have this RPS01 folder, but the root of my project is something called RPS coding. So I'm going to be in there, and what I want to do is type git and init, which is going to initialize this folder into a Git repository. And if you paying attention, happen pretty quick, you can see that there's some, these are kind of lighting up now, right? This knows this is a Git repository. This is kind of already telling me I have untracked changes. So we can test that just by doing git status. And you can see that I have two things that are untracked, this RPS01 folder and that DS store, which is something that kind of happens on a Mac machine. So what I can do at this point is I'll do a git add, which is this. Now I'm not going to add the README because one, we don't have a README because we didn't do that step, we deleted. And two, I want to add everything. So I'm going to just do a git add dot, which is now going to add everything to git tracking. So we'll do a status again. And you can see I have all these new files. Then what I'm going to do is do a git commit -m, and I'm going to give it a message, and I'm going to say, starter files added. So now we have a commit message. You can see this one looks a little bit different. Actually, both of these are going to look a little different. The extra step here is we need to tell our local Git repository that we have on our machine, make it aware of our repository that we want to push to on GitHub. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to paste it right here. You can see kind of the format of this is basically always the same. It's always going to be https github.com/your username / the repository name that you created .git. It's always going to follow that template. So it's pretty predictable what that's going to look like. Once that's in here, I'm going to hit enter. I think that worked. Yeah, that looks good. And then what I'm going to do is just copy paste this just to save myself some typing. And hit enter. And ignoring this little error that I need to fix one of these days, we should see that we were able to push all that stuff up onto our Git repository. And if I go back to GitHub and just hit the refresh button, now in this repository, I have a RPS 01 folder, and it'll have all the stuff that we were just working on. So that'll kind of be our starting branch. It's kind of a bookmark of where we're at now. In the next video, what we're going to work on is starting to add in Bootstrap, give ourselves a nice landing page for our application, and kind of expand out from there. So we'll see you in the next video.